Is this outrageous enough for you? All this in a Hemi engine, too? Welcome to the story of Chrysler's winged wonders. If there were ever two cars built for one purpose, these were the cars: the Dodge Daytona and the Plymouth Superbird. Their purpose was to win races for Chrysler Corporation on tracks like Talladega, Daytona, and Charlotte. These factory race cars, with their streamlined noses and high spoilers, could achieve frightening speeds on the high banking. With the Chrysler Hemi engine under the hood, which had horsepower to burn, there seemed to be no limit to how fast these cars could go.
These wing cars were really the bullets of the racetrack. They dominated the races, no question. Very few cars could outrun them.
Dodge was first out of the box with the Daytona in mid-year 1969. It was their answer to the new aerodynamically styled Ford Torino Talladega and the Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2. The Dodge Daytona wasn't the product of a design studio. It had its birth in the race shops.
The Charger 500 and the Daytona were designed by the racers. Styling had nothing to do with the car. When the final product was shown to styling, they called it an abomination. When the Superbird rolled around, it was a year later, styling was involved to enhance the overall package.
The Superbird and Daytona were two different cars, but at 200 miles per hour, it was awfully hard to tell them apart. These cars were proof that Chrysler Corporation loved to build and race fast cars. The stock car racing rule said everything that raced on Sunday had to be available at the dealerships on Monday. So thanks to Chrysler's desire to win on Sunday, muscle car fans made out like bandits. You could actually own one of these, but you had to act fast because Chrysler only intended to make about 2,500 of them, just enough to qualify as stock cars under NASCAR's rules. The Daytona and the Superbird are today among the rarest muscle cars ever made. Collector groups estimate that almost 1,000 of these cars remain today, an astonishing survival rate of almost 50%. Obviously, car collectors recognized from the very start that these cars were special. Thanks to racing rule changes and the prevailing mood of the early 70s, the Daytona and the Superbird disappeared from the racetracks and the showrooms almost as fast as they appeared. But during the short 18-month period we now call the Aero Wars, there was no better example of the extremes to which Chrysler's gearhead engineers were willing to go to win races.
Chrysler certainly outperformed everybody else. Ford was competitive, but really the 60s NASCAR belonged to Chrysler.
The Superbird and Daytona were aerodynamics taken to the extreme. But aero cars, of one kind or another, actually started showing up at the racetracks years earlier. We'll pick up our story at the beginning of the Aero Wars when the American muscle car returns. There wasn't much science to stock car racing in its early days. Basically, the sport was about staying on the track for the length of the race. Fine points like aerodynamics took a back seat to just keeping the engine running and keeping the wheels on. Nonetheless, some racers did discover that things like rolling up the windows and taping over the headlights made a small difference, particularly on longer tracks. As stock car racing graduated from the half-mile bull rings and the dirt tracks to the super speedways, drivers and mechanics were beginning to deal with space-age concepts like slipstreaming and downforce. Gary Romberg is a Chrysler engineer who helped bring aero technology into stock car racing.
I've been with Chrysler Corporation since 1961. When I came to Chrysler, I was assigned basically to NASA in Huntsville, Alabama, doing the aerodynamics of space launch vehicles. In the late 60s, this job opened up in Detroit in race aerodynamics. So I took that job and I walked right in at the time when the Superbird and Daytona were being developed.
One of the first attempts at creating a bumper-to-bumper aero package was the 1966 Dodge Charger. Its fastback roofline was supposed to make the air flow more smoothly over the car, giving it greater speed and stability. Unfortunately, the Charger looked a lot better than it ran. David Pearson won the first of his 3 Grand National Driving Championships that year in a Dodge, but not a Dodge Charger.
In '66, I drove a Charger at Daytona, and we thought that was going to be the car to run on the super speedways, but we felt like it wouldn't after we rented. We went back to the regular 2-door, and it seemed like it did better on the super speedways than even the Charger did.
Despite its lackluster performance on the racetrack, by 1969, the Dodge Charger had become a street favorite. The second-generation Charger's blend of luxury and power and one of Chrysler's most distinctive body styles wasn't just popular with the muscle car crowd, the car also had a lot of aero potential. When the Dodge teams showed up at the racetrack at the beginning of the '69 season, they brought a car that looked like the '69 Charger, but with a few aerodynamic improvements. Dodge called it the Charger 500. It had a flush grille and a redesigned rear deck with an almost horizontal rear window. Again, it wasn't exactly what they were hoping for.
We weren't doing very well on the track, so we brought out the Charger 500. We still didn't do very well on the track. We had taken our engine technology about as far as we could at that particular time, and so we asked the aerodynamics people, of which I was one of them, to be able to develop a car body that would get through the air quicker and faster and better than our Charger 500. Out of that work came the Dodge Daytona.
This was the Dodge Daytona. The car was a product of months of development by Chrysler's engineers working with the racing teams. Harry Lee Hyde, son of NASCAR crew chief Harry Hyde, remembers how the race teams were introduced to the Daytona.
The original ones were built at Nichols Engineering. Chrysler had developed this thing. They built the original ones there for a pattern for us to go by. We brought this one back and revamped all the rest of the cars to this car.
All the Charger 500's good parts, like the fastback rear window, showed up on the Daytona. Plus, a couple new features that were hard to miss.
This car you see here is basically the same thing as the D500, only the nose part was changed in the front, and the front configuration right over top of the tires. The wing was added to the rear for a more stable downforce, plus that wing was up in a lot cleaner air than what a spoiler would be.
It was that nose and that outrageous rear wing that aroused the most attention, particularly after the car rolled onto the new Talladega racetrack for the first time and shattered the speed record.
The average speed was hitting 205, 210 in a draft. We ran 201 with it, just in normal qualifying trim.
Dodge now had the car that could dominate at Talladega and all the other speedways. But before the Daytona could go racing, there was the little matter of NASCAR's minimum production requirements. We'll tell you that story when the American Muscle Car returns. Building 20 racing Daytonas was easy. Building 500 Daytonas for the street was hard, even though the car was mostly '69 Charger. Restorer John Aruza explains some of the things that had to be done to make a Charger into a Daytona.
The nose cone is sheet metal. The headlight doors are fiberglass. They just used the 70 model Charger fender and hood because the 70 model Charger was going to come out with the wraparound bumper, which gave perfect place to line up the nose cone.
The little bumps on the Daytona's fenders served an important purpose too.
Chrysler had holes in the tops of the fenders to release air trapped in the front fenders at high speed. They really didn't want the Ford camp or the Chevy camp to realize that that's what they were for, so they came up with the story that the tires were rubbing and they needed to cut a hole in the fender for the tire. Well, that was actually not the case. They really did speed the car up by releasing trapped air from inside the fender.
Race car design can interfere with street car functionality. In these situations, Dodge had to make a few compromises, as wing car authority David Paddock shows.
When these cars were originally engineered, this little wing was way down here. The problem with that was no way to open the deck lid. So the engineers raised the wing, and the deck lid opens, barely clears the wing.
There were no compromises under the hood, though, and there weren't many choices either. The short list of engines included two 440 cubic inch torque monsters, or the magnificent 426 Hemi. Two transmissions were available, Chrysler's 727 Torque Flight Automatic, or their heavy-duty 4-speed. Sure grip rear ends were standard, completing what was one of the most unbreakable powertrains ever assembled. Chrysler's records show that 503 Charger Daytonas were made. But according to Dr. Don Tarr, a Chrysler factory race driver, only about half of these actually made it to the Dodge dealers.
The story I got, there were supposed to have been 500 built and counted, and after they did that and they found out there were only about 250 left, they had torn a lot of them down and sent them away to the race car teams and to use for parts. And when NASCAR found out about that, they got a little upset.
There's a great story about how they were supposed to build, I believe, 500 units. And they had the NASCAR people there inspecting at the plant, and they were just rolling cars back in and back in and back in. So there's no telling how many times they looked at the same car and didn't know it.
NASCAR knew that racing was more fun, and ticket sales were more brisk when everybody played. So the Daytona was pronounced legal, and the world turned its eyes toward Talladega, where these new cars promised to go faster than ever before. So fast, in fact, that some people were looking for ways to slow this thing down. But there were problems at the new Talladega racetrack, and the aero cars were the cause. Up and down pit row, Ford and Chrysler teams alike were dealing with the effects of increased speed and downforce, as David Pearson recalls.
Goodyear was having trouble with the tires because we never had run that fast and never had that much pressure on the car or the tires going through the corner. And they was coming apart and blowing a lot of tires. And so there was quite a few of us drivers felt like it was unsafe.
A proposal by the drivers to postpone the race 1 week until better tires were available was denied. So most of the top-named drivers, David Pearson among them, chose to sit the race out.
And France wouldn't do it. He said, no, we're going to run the race, this week. And so he's a little hard-headed, and we was too. And so some of us drivers got together and said, well, if he's going to do that, if he thinks that much about it, let's just don't run.
Without many of NASCAR's top-named drivers, the first Talladega 500 was run on schedule, with a field made up mostly of short-track drivers and smaller cars. A few of the factory cars were entered with substitute drivers. A Dodge Daytona driver, Richard Brickhouse, won the race, which featured none of the usual excitement, and thankfully, no calamities from blown tires.
But they went ahead and ran the race, and they didn't have any trouble. Everything come out all right.
By the end of the 1969 season, the race teams and the tire companies were learning to deal with the byproducts of aerodynamics, and Dodge's Daytona had made a name for itself in competition.
We won 17 races in 1969, but did not win the championship.
Going into 1970, the wing was the thing on the high bank track. And this year, Plymouth was going to get their own aero warrior, the Superbird. Stand by as America gets its first glimpse of Plymouth's winged wonder. on the American muscle car. Stacked against the Daytona's 17 wins in 1969, Plymouth's 2-win season had been a disaster. As soon as they saw the Dodge Daytona on the track, Plymouth's aero team knew what they had to do. The Roadrunner was one of America's most beloved street muscle cars, but in aero terms, it was a shoebox. It was, however, the no-brainer choice to be the platform for Plymouth's wing car. The Roadrunner and the Charger shared Mopar's B-body platform, so most of the swoopy parts that had to be made for the Daytona would work on the Roadrunner with a little massaging. To make the nose cone fit, the Superbird used the Dodge Coronet front fenders and hood. Its wing had larger uprights and was raked back at a more extreme angle. The Superbird differed from the Daytona in one other way. There were going to be more of them. This year, NASCAR upped the production quota to 1 car for every 2 dealerships. This meant almost 2,000 Superbirds would soon show up at Plymouth dealers all over America. Smith Stokes, a young Plymouth dealer in 1970, remembers his eagerness to get a Superbird as his demonstrator model.
Well, in 1970, I got a brochure that came through the mail from Chrysler announcing they were going to put a wing car in racing, and we heard rumors Richard Petty would be back with the car. I anxiously ordered one. In fact, we just looked at the order blank a minute ago over here, and I discovered I actually phoned the order, and I was so excited.
Plymouth was committed to making 4 times as many Superbirds as there were Dodge Daytonas. Faced with having 2,000 expensive, outrageous mobiles hanging around their lots that they couldn't sell, they planned from the beginning to make the cars very buyer-friendly. Like the Daytona, the Superbird's standard engine was the romping 440 cubic inch Super Commando with 1 Carter AVS 4-barrel carburetor. This engine had a 9.7 to 1 compression ratio and made 375 horsepower at 4,600 RPMs and 480 foot-pounds of torque at 3,200 RPMs. You could opt for the 6-barrel version of this engine, which made 390 horsepower and up the torque to 490 foot-pounds. Or you could luck into one of the 93 Superbirds produced with a 426 Street Hemi, which weighed in at 425 horsepower and 510 foot-pounds of torque. The Hemi was an $841 option, but with this engine, you didn't run with the big dogs, you were the big dog. Many of the Roadrunner's performance options were available on the Superbird, like 15x7 rally wheels, and F60 15 white letter tires, and the Sure Grip rear end. All Superbirds featured front disc brakes as standard equipment. In addition, the Superbird could be a pretty fancy ride, with an optional 8-track player, custom steering wheel, console, gauges, and other dress-up equipment. With a base price of $4,298, the Superbird was a big-ticket item. Just a few options could price this car out of reach of most muscle car buyers. Sharon Malcolm was a Plymouth dealer in 1970 who had no luck selling the 1 Superbird at her dealership.
We had 1 Toro Red Superbird, and it seemed like that no one wanted the cars with the wings on them. And we'd had the car 6 months, and they came to us and wanted us to pay the car off, and we didn't have the money. So I had to go to the bank and borrow the money to pay that Superbird off just in order to get it off my floor plan.
Superbirds might not have been moving very quickly on the sales floor, but they were moving like lightning on the racetrack. We'll check back in with the race teams when the American Muscle Car returns. As the 1970 racing season took the green flag, it was apparent that it was going to be a good year for the cars with the wings. The Petty Blue Plymouths were in the winner's circle immediately, winning the Daytona 500 to start the season. Not to be outdone, Dodge driver Buddy Baker set a new world's record of 200.447 miles per hour at Talladega. But once again, the combination of exotic race engines and wind tunnel aerodynamics were sending speeds through the roof, with no end in sight. Clearly, something had to be done to make sure NASCAR racing was a safe show.
You got to worry about fan safety as much as your driver safety. These cars could have very well been hitting 240 to 250 pretty quick had NASCAR have not got a hold on it before then.
By August, NASCAR was ready with a plan to slow things down.
During 1970, they removed the side glass from the cars to slow them down. They did some other things to try to put a cap on this.
Slowing the cars down was a start, but what NASCAR really wanted was for all these trick body styles to go away and to get back to racing more conventional cars.
Bill France, I don't think, was too happy to see these cars. I think he had an idea of wanting to keep his stock car racing series a little less exotic than some of the other series. He wanted the cars to look like what you and I would drive on the street at the time.
From 1971 on, the wing cars would carry a lot more weight around the racetrack or run a tiny little 305 cubic inch engine. These handicaps were too much even for cars like the Superbird and the Daytona. They disappeared from the racetracks overnight. So few of these cars were ever built that it's rare to see one today, except at gatherings like the Aero Warriors Reunion at the International Motorsports Hall of Fame at Talladega. When wing car lovers get together, they share a very special fellowship.
If you're a Mopar person, you know what B5 blue is, you know what A4 silver is, and all the different colors of the cars. And so, you know, you get this talk. You kind of get the Mopar talk.
The Daytona and the Superbird were a short but unforgettable blip on the automotive radar screen. Thanks to the restorers, there are a few left today to remind us of the days when car companies were willing to be outrageous just to win races. Thanks for watching. And remember, don't crush them, restore them. In the 60s, you could be sure of one thing. If you pulled up next to a Mopar, you'd better be ready to race. During the muscle car years, Chrysler Corporation had a habit of building the most radical racing hardware and hiding it under some very plain Jane sheet metal, like a 426 Max Wedge engine in a Dodge Polara. They would then take this combination out to the local drag strip and terrorize the competition. This might not sound like fun for everybody, but if you were a Chrysler fan, it's what you lived for.
They saw the opportunity to enhance the engineering of the vehicles through racing. And of course, usually most of these guys were gearheads anyway, and they just liked racing.
When drag racing started, the excitement was centered around the open-wheel dragsters and altered coupes. Nobody paid very much attention to the handful of people who were out there racing their daily drivers. But by the early 60s, Detroit was starting to crank out some pretty fast street cars, and the drag strip was a great and safe place to blow somebody's doors off. Soon, street cars filled out two classes, one for purely stock cars and another for cars with special factory racing parts. They called this class Superstock. By the end of the 60s, Superstock had become drag racing's most popular class, and Chrysler Corporation owned it. Teams like the Ram Chargers and cars like the Melrose Missile and Landis Dodge are legends today, icons of drag racing's golden age. Chrysler's engineers ensured their success by coming up with one huge horsepower maker after another. These Max Wedge and Hemi engines, known by names like Red Ram, Golden Commando, Ram Charger, and Magnum, were nearly indestructible and made more power in stock trim than any other engine. When Chrysler installed these bad boy engines into their lightweight bodies, they created unforgettable race cars and awesome street machines. Herb McCandless has spent 35 years building and racing Chryslers and working with their engineers. He considers them the best in the business.
They were hands-on racers, all of them. You know, the Ram Chargers and the Golden Commando group and those people, they were all hands-on racers. That's why that program was so successful, because they knew what it took to make it work.
More than any other cars, Chrysler Super Stockers were responsible for drag racing's incredible rise in popularity through the 60s. These cars and the people that built them and drove them created a style of racing that influenced an entire generation of street muscle cars and put a young sport called drag racing on the map.
They were just the leader of the industry as far as drag racing. They went to the races to win.
But back when it all started, it was just a bunch of good old boys on an abandoned airstrip, lining them up and running them off. We'll go there when the American muscle car returns. Drag racing was coming of age in the mid-50s, but it was still grassroots motorsports at its finest. The name of the game was run what you brung and hope you brung enough. Saturday afternoon showdowns were happening at local drag strips all over America. The age-old question of whose car was fastest was a huge drawing card for spectators and racers alike, as Ford, Chevy, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, and even Studebaker were going at it head-to-head. About the only cars you didn't see at the drag strip were Chrysler products. Drag racing's first principle was power to weight. And even by mid-50s standards, Chryslers were real tanks. They did have a revolutionary new engine, though, and it could make incredible horsepower. Drag racing legend Big Daddy Don Garlitz remembers his first glimpse of this engine at the local Chrysler dealership.
My buddy and I were driving to work, and we drove by the Chrysler dealership there and had a big sign in the window, had a big V, and it said 180 horsepower. I said, Grady, stop the car. There's something wrong here. We got to go check this out. So we spun around there, went back to the dealership, went inside and said, there's a sign on the window that says 180 horsepower and a V. Has Chrysler got a V8 now? And surely that must be a mistake. 180 horsepower was, well, a hot flathead was 175 with everything on it. So how could a stock engine be 180?
They called it a Hemi because the shape of the combustion chamber was a hemisphere, a design which allowed better intake and exhaust breathing. Garlitz soon installed one of these engines in his car, but not his dragster. He put it in his tow car.
I'd gotten my hands on one for my coupe, but I only bought it to put in that coupe to tow with. I was still towing my flathead dragster behind it. So one day at the drags, I told my wife just casually, I think I'll make a time run with the 39. And I drove this little 39 coupe down the drag strip. It went 14 seconds. 114. And I knew right then, if I put that engine in a dragster, it would really be something.
Before long, the Hemi took ownership of the dragster classes as it grew from 331 to 354 and finally to 392 cubic inches. Thanks to Don Garlitz and others, there was a Chrysler Hemi in the winner's circle every week. By the early 60s, though, those stock cars were becoming as popular as the dragsters.
Superstock took a huge jump forward in 1960 at the NHRA Nationals in Detroit when Pontiac made an extremely good showing in front of their hometown crowd, which included a lot of GM executives. They saw the crowd reaction to these cars and they went, hey, we can sell cars from this.
Sell cars is exactly what Ford and GM did. The factory Impalas and Galaxy Superstockers were world beaters at the strip and on the sales floor. Finally, in late 1961, Chrysler decided to join the fun with a brand new 62 Dodge that looked pretty racy. To help them get their super stock program on track, they called Big Daddy.
It was a beautiful red little jewel. They had taken this 413 wedge motor that they had used in the stock automobiles, and they'd put dual carbs on it. This was a car for racing.
Following drag racing's winning formula of putting your biggest engine in your lightest body, Chrysler stuffed its new 413 Max Wedge engine into the lightweight 62 Dodge Dart 330 and Plymouth Belvedere and created an instant super stocker. Chrysler had stopped building the Hemi engine in 1958 as an economy move. They had replaced this all-world power plant with a 413 cubic inch wedge head engine. The Wedge, again named for the shape of its combustion chambers, wasn't as sexy as the Hemi, but in typical Chrysler fashion, they had a hot version of this engine. They called it the Max Wedge.
The name Max Wedge meant that they had taken the engine out to what they felt was the maximum. It was really a great piece of workmanship.
Finally, Mopar had a competitive super stock package and a pretty nice street car as well. Don Garlitz remembers one of the nicest things about racing superstock was being able to drive his race car to the track.
I drove it to the big drag race at Green Valley, Texas from Tampa. And my wife and I just put our luggage and all in the back and drove out there and got our motel. We went to the Dodge dealership. They put a 456 rear in it. Just jacked it up, put a whole pumpkin in there for me. I left the 331 laying on the ground, and when the race was over, we went back and put the 331 back in and drove back home. It was incredible.
The balance of power was shifting in superstock racing. From now on, the Ford and GM drivers would have to deal with a full assault from Dodge and Plymouth. Stay with us for some Max Wedge thunder on the American muscle car. The 1962 Superstock season was a melee between the new Max Wedge Dodges and Plymouths and the factory-backed lightweight Pontiacs, Fords, and Chevrolets. While their competition made extensive use of lightweight aluminum or fiberglass body parts, the Mopars relied on sheer horsepower.
They completely dominated the sport. When they introduced them then at the Winter Nationals in 1962, let me tell you, they were just killers. It put all of the factories in high gear, setting up special racing versions. And I mean, it got completely wild before it was over.
By 1963, Chrysler was having way too much fun to quit. Even though the 413 Max Wedge had performed well, this year, in classic Mopar fashion, it was bored out to 426 cubic inches and packed with more heavy-duty parts. The tall deck block was bored to 4.25 inches and used a stroke of 3.75 inches. With two Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors on an aluminum cross-ram intake manifold, special upswept exhaust headers, and 10.25 to 1 compression, Chrysler rated this engine at 425 horsepower, which absolutely no one believed. These mid-sized Mopars were long on performance, but short on image. Super Duty Pontiacs and 409 Impalas could be pretty fancy cars, but the Polara and the Belvedere were about as fancy as the inside of a phone booth. These interiors never won any awards for luxury, but the car looked good enough to race. The no-frills interior also contributed to the car's skinny curb weight of 3,050 pounds. This year, the racing Mopars could slim down even more. A special lightweight racing package included aluminum front fenders, hood, doors, and front bumper. The beauty of it all was this entire car, from its aluminum nose to its 486 Sure Grip rear end, could be bought over the counter at your Dodge and Plymouth dealer. There were no back doors, no special codes, no secret handshakes. You just sat down with a salesman and ordered it, which is exactly how Dwayne Feitzer's dad got his '63 Max Wedge Dodge.
My dad bought this car new in '63. He street raced it quite a bit. My mom drove the car quite a bit. She street raced it, from what I've been told, you know.
The price tag for this ready-to-race Mopar? $3,602, which included AM radio, 2-speed wipers, power steering, and, of course, the 415-horse Ram Charger engine.
One of the greatest things about superstock drag racing in that period of time was how level the playing field was. You didn't have to have a lot of money to be competitive. You just had to have the passion.
Mopar's turnkey race cars made this Walter Mitty dream a reality for more than one young race fan.
My favorite story is a guy by the name of Dick Dyke, who from Sioux City, Iowa, who at the age of 23 ordered a superstock Dodge. Took the car home, modified the rear suspension, changed the valving in the transmission, the automatic transmission, put a set of headers on it, and ran a 1232 right out of the box. He flat-towed the car to the AHRA Nationals and cleaned house. He beat everybody, and he ended up as top stock eliminator. There was no big money. Any guy could win.
Going into 1964, there was still room at the top for ambitious young superstock racers. We'll tell you about it when the American muscle car returns. Superstock's popularity was having a trickle-down effect on every part of drag racing. Superstock attracted racers, which attracted more spectators. More spectators attracted the big car companies, who built faster cars, which attracted more racers. In short, Superstock was the best thing that had ever happened to this little sport.
Looking back, that was a turning point for drag racing that really made it professional, because when the factories took notice and were producing vehicles just for drag racing, it gave all the other sponsors the incentive to get involved in drag racing.
And by far, to date, the best thing that had happened to Superstock, at least from a Chrysler fan's perspective, was the reappearance of the Hemi engine. After a 6-year vacation, the Hemi was back with a vengeance. Chrysler had brought it out of retirement to win races on the NASCAR tracks, but the drag racers jumped all over it. The Hemi engine caused Superstock champion Bullet Bob Reed to switch from Chevy to Mopar.
I'm sitting at Tampa Dragway one day, and Beecher Wyatt unloaded a '64 Plymouth Savoy with a Hemi in it off of a ramp truck. And when he fired that thing up, my dad says, you might as well get rid of that 409 because it's all over with.
The new 426 cubic inch race Hemi was superior to the early Hemis in many ways. This power plant used the 426 wedge block. The new Hemi heads squeezed out a 12.5 to 1 compression ratio. The Hemi also came with a solid lifter cam and a new design intake manifold mounting 2 Carter AFB 4-barrels. This new elephant motor was so strong that engine failures were practically a thing of the past.
I used to go to Cotton Owens' shop, and that's what he'd do. He'd put them on the dyno, pull the throttle back, set them at the 425 horsepower, around 7,000, and we'd go to lunch. He said, if it's running when we get back, it's a good one.
Now, with the Hemi and the Max Wedge, drag strips were playgrounds for Mopar racers. Out on the streets, though, a revolution was happening. GM's lineup for 1964 included some lightweight intermediate cars with mountain motor engines. Unlike Mopar's cars, however, these cars were loaded with plush options and rich kid image. They called them muscle cars. They had tough-sounding names like GTO and Supersport, and suddenly they were the cars young people had to have. None of them could stay with a full-house Max Wedge for a city block, but that didn't matter at the drive-in. Next to them, Polaris and Belvederes were old people's cars. Over the next 2 years, Chrysler's drag racing and NASCAR stars kept Dodge and Plymouth fans happy. while their styling department searched for that magic combination that would lure young America back into its showrooms. Finally, they found it. All they had to do was take a superstocker and load it down with class. Mopar lover Ken Marsh chose this 67 Belvedere GTX for its luxury and performance.
This car was about $3,800 with the Hemi engine option, but the GTX also had wheel lip moldings and rocker panel moldings and all the chrome and consoles and all the dress-up, so this was a high-end version of the muscle cars.
Cars like the 67 GTX were light, racy-looking, and as luxurious as a Chrysler Imperial. But with a standard 440 cubic inch Super Commando or the optional 426 Street Hemi under the hood, they didn't back down from anyone. But some exciting years lay just ahead for Mopar fans. The Roadrunner makes its debut when the American muscle car returns. Since the beginning of the Superstock days, Mopar's racers had been test drivers for new technology.
We found out with Chrysler that the stuff that we would test and run in our race cars would wind up being in the production cars in the next couple of years.
One of drag racing's most famous teams was Sox and Martin. Their red, white, and blue cars were synonymous with Chrysler Corporation. Ronnie Sox remembers how Chrysler used the data that he and other racers developed.
Chrysler got more for their money from what they spent in racing probably than Ford or Chevrolet ever thought about doing it. They really did a good job with it, and we would test a lot all week long, and then at the end of every test, Chrysler would mail out what they learned at these tests to all their contracted cars. I think they were smart by doing that. They really stole a lot of, especially when they came out with that Roadrunner in '68. Man, that's when their sales really started going.
The 1968 Roadrunner was, at last, Mopar's hit with the youth market. After years of making ground-shaking muscle cars, finally they hit a home run in the image department. The Roadrunner's claim to fame was speed on a budget. The car was designed to run 100 miles per hour in the quarter mile and sell for less than $3,000. On that budget, the Roadrunner featured a Beck seat, rubber floor mats, and no creature comforts at all. Young people ate it up. From its cartoon decals to its beep-beep horn, Plymouth sold 46,000 Roadrunners in 1968, coming full circle back to the formula they had pioneered in 1962. Put your baddest engine in your lightest car and take it to the track. Through the years, Superstock has led drag racing in many different directions. Thanks to technology and the racer's own creativity, the factory experimental class grew out of Superstock, as did Funny Car and Pro Stock, which has become one of drag racing's all-time favorite competitions. But those early 60s Dodges and Plymouths still hold a place in many people's hearts. Today, even with all the changes in racing, or maybe because of them, the Mopar Superstockers are just as popular as they ever were. And thanks to some new technology, they're even faster.
People love these 68 cars because they wheel stand and they go fast. They're really fun to watch. They're fun to drive. I love to drive.
So whether you were there in the 60s or you're watching your first drag race today, seeing two of these ground pounders pull up to the line together is still one of the most exciting moments in motorsports, because there's just nothing else like them.
When you got a Hemi car, it's a little bit different. And I used to say, there ain't but two kind of people. People got Hemis and people want Hemis. It's just that simple. That's all there is to it.
Thanks for watching, and please remember, don't crush them, restore them. What's up with this? An American Motors muscle car? You bet it is. It's an AMX. It had to happen sooner or later. In the late 60s, when everybody wanted a cool-looking, fast car, you had to figure that even American Motors would get into the game. Among the big three Detroit automakers, American Motors was number 4. AMC wasn't even headquartered in Detroit. They were out there on the edge of the Midwest, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And since they weren't in Detroit, they felt no obligation to do things the way the big three did. American Motors might not have been in Detroit, but they knew how to build a nice car, and they weren't dumb. They knew their customers well, and they had existed since the end of World War II by building small, economical cars that delivered trouble-free performance and great gas mileage at a nice price. But then, the muscle car thing happened. Overnight, all the flash and dash in the auto industry was focused on a new breed of mega horsepowered cruise missiles aimed directly at the heart of the youth market. By 1966, every other automaker had at least 2 go-fast packages in their showrooms and were working on more. But out there in Kenosha, American Motors was still making sensible cars for sensible adults and waiting for all this muscle car foolishness to blow over. But the muscle car trend was not slowing down. It was getting bigger year by year, and there was no end in sight. There were some folks inside AMC that were dying to play this go-fast game. They had already tested the waters with a couple of packages, like the Rebel and the Marlin, which, like most muscle car first attempts, were more image than performance. But in 1968, they revealed a car that was 180 out from anything American Motors had ever come up with. They called it AMX. It stood for American Motors Experimental, and it was definitely an experiment. Thankfully for muscle car lovers, it was an experiment that turned out exceedingly well. The AMX was a rocket ship, pure and simple. Its straight-line acceleration was awesome, thanks to its 390 cubic inch engine. And its short wheelbase and heavy-duty suspension made it handle like a race car. It was also the only high-performance 2-seat automobile made in America, other than the Corvette. Unfortunately, American Motors never made enough of these cars for everyone to experience driving one. But on the other hand, since there were fewer than 20,000 built, the AMX enjoys true collector car status today. Among its owners, the AMX is one of the most beloved automobiles ever built. AMX fans are fiercely loyal to their car and to AMC.
These cars were more than competitive in the market. They were the better cars. They were better looking and just as fast as anything else on the street.
The AMX brought American Motors out from behind its economy car image for the most exciting years in its history. But the muscle car years were an exciting time for the whole auto industry and for muscle car fans. We'll go there when the American muscle car returns. At the end of World War II, several small car companies held a pretty nice share of the U.S. auto market. But by the early 50s, most of the small car makers had disappeared, except for American Motors. AMC, which had been created in 1954, had one corporate philosophy: small, economical cars are good. This philosophy had served them well through several years of selling no-frills cars that hardly changed from year to year. AMC's customers knew exactly what to expect from their Ramblers, Classics, and Ambassadors. And the cars didn't disappoint them. By the late 50s, AMC practically owned this comfortable little economy car market, until two things happened. The first was the Volkswagen. It wasn't a big thing at the time, but it was a direct assault on AMC's little car dominance and a hint of things to come. The second was the recession that hit the country in 1958. Detroit was deep into chrome and fins at the time. But when the American car buyer demanded smaller cars, Ford, GM, and Chrysler acted fast. Within 2 years, the Big Three rolled out a half-dozen small cars that were as economical as Ramblers, but looked young and sporty. These cars took a big chunk out of AMC's private market segment. By 1963, AMC no longer controlled the small car marketplace. At the same time, cars like the Mustang and the GTO were tilting the playing field away from family cars towards exciting, youthful packages with lots of power. To make up for these losses, they needed something that would attract a whole new wave of younger buyers. But moving American Motors out of its old car niche into the swinging 60s was not going to be easy. Without a lot of development money, AMC was forced to create new cars from existing designs. In 1965, they introduced a car called the Marlin by grafting a swoopy roof onto the full-size Rambler Ambassador. The car lasted until 1967, but its overall size and its lack of performance didn't turn on anyone. But help was on the way. New management was taking over at AMC, and they had a secret weapon, a styling chief named Dick Teague, whose designs would give this car company the sporty car they needed. Inside Teague's advanced styling department, there was a new car on the drawing board, which didn't look very much like a Rambler. It had a fastback roofline and long, graceful sail pillars. Its grille was deep set, and its tail was short. Its hood had twin sculptures, and it rested on chrome wheels and wide tires.
Richard Teague came up with the idea of a two-seater performance car. Early in '68, they came out with a Javelin. In mid-year of '68, they come out with a shortened-up version. It was shorter with no back seat in it, and they called this the AMX, which stands for American Motors Experimental.
Not everyone in American Motors management thought the AMX, or sporty cars in general, were such a good idea. But when AMC's dealers saw the car for the first time, they went wild, and the decision was made. For the first time in its corporate history, American Motors would make a car for someone single and under 50. In Kenosha, you could feel the ground shake. When we return, we'll feel the ground shake from the rumble of the AMX on the American muscle car. The 1968 AMX was introduced in the middle of the model year, just like the Mustang's mid-year debut 4 years earlier. And like the Mustang, its new, fresh design attracted a lot of attention. The AMX was a two-seater, and it was built on a very short 97-inch wheelbase. These two physical characteristics immediately branded the AMX a sports car. But the way this car accelerated placed it squarely in the muscle car ranks.
That car was a real giant killer. They make massive torque. That's a 390 in there, and 426 foot-pounds of torque. And they're light. They're about 3,000 pounds, a little over 3,000 pounds. And horsepower to weight, that's what it's all about. Good old muscle car.
The AMX's base engine was the rather unremarkable 225 horsepower, 290 cubic inch V8. Definitely not a muscle car power plant, at least not in stock trim. But Teague and the other designers knew a car like this deserved a real thumper. So the AMX's engine lineup also included two other choices. There was the middleweight 343 cubic inch engine, which made 280 horsepower. But the Go Big or Stay Home engine was AMC's top-of-the-line 315 horsepower 390. The 390 boasted a lot of go-fast parts, which were usually found on full-on racing engines, like a forged steel crankshaft and rods. 315 horsepower at 4,800 RPM was exciting enough, but the engine also made 425 foot-pounds of torque. With this much torque, the 3,097-pound AMX was nothing short of scary. This little car flattened your eyeballs on acceleration, which was a joy for long-suffering AMC fans, and a rude surprise for a lot of unsuspecting muscle car owners who thought they might like to race this little Rambler.
They went from six-cylinder Ramblers and Metros to hang on, boys, here we go. Anybody that's in that other lane, we'll show them what a Rambler can do.
The 390 engine was the central ingredient in the AMX Go package. This option included heavier-duty shocks and springs, power disc brakes, red-line tires, a twin-grip differential, and a heavy-duty cooling system. Teague styling and all this hot rod hardware made the AMX an instant winner with the young people, exactly the market AMC's new young thinking management wanted to reach. By the end of 1968, AMC had made 6,725 numbered editions of the little car. The novelty of a two-seater and the fact that there were so few of them on the street ensured that everywhere the AMX went, it drew a crowd. The performance world also came under the American Motors attack, as Craig Breedlove set 106 new high-performance and endurance records with two very patriotic-looking red, white, and blue 1968 AMXs. And in a sure sign that the car had arrived, Playboy chose it to be the official ride of their Playmate of the Year for 1968. In 1968, you couldn't get much more chic than that. For 1969, American Motors knew they were riding a winner. We'll be back with the AMX's biggest, baddest year on the American muscle car. AMC might have spent the better part of its life in the slow lane, but once they got into the fast lane, they made up for all that lost time in a hurry. The 1969 AMXs were almost clones of the 68s, but they were so rare that very few people had actually seen one anyway. The American Motors muscle car most people had seen was another advanced styling department masterpiece called the Javelin. The Javelin was American Motors' answer to the Mustang. It had been introduced in early 1968, 6 months before the AMX, and had outperformed all its sales expectations in its first year, selling over 56,000 cars. The Javelin sat on a 109-inch wheelbase and was a true four-seat pony car. By 1969, you could order the same equipment on the Javelin, from comfort and convenience to engines and transmissions. But the difference was you could take two more friends cruising with you. In true American Motors fashion, to save costs, the AMX and the Javelin shared a lot of sheet metal and other components. The Javelin contributed its cowl, windshield, doors, rear deck lid, and bumpers to the AMX's cause. This platform engineering caused a lot of Javelin owners to refer to the AMX as a Javelin without a back seat. The 1968 AMX had taken a few hits in the press for its Rambler-like economy car interior. So for 1969, AMC loaded the car's insides with all the nice muscle car stuff. Lovely leather seats with headrests were now available. The instrument panel was upgraded with a larger 8,000 RPM tach and 140 mile-per-hour speedometer. The four-speed cars now came with Hurst shifters, and the automatic transmission cars now had consoles. And in what must surely have been a response to a 68 owner's suggestion, there was now a grab bar for the passenger to hang on to when the driver wanted to hang it out a little bit. The AMX already owned one of the more unique images of any American car. But now AMC decided to really go all out with a splash of color. Taking a page from Chrysler's playbook, the AMX was offered in 10 new colors, including 3 special shades called Big Bad Blue, Big Bad Green, and Big Bad Orange. These colors were more than big and bad. They were rare. only 742 Big Bad 69 AMXs were produced. And with the 8,293 other AMXs sold that year, 1969 was a great year for the little car. As the 1970 cars rolled into view, once again, American Motors brought back the AMX largely unchanged. A little restyling was done to the nose and tail, and the car was lowered 1 inch overall. But the car's classic profile was too distinctive to change. For its third year, the AMX remained the Corvette's only competition in the two-seater market. By now, though, this car was more at home in the company of ground pounders like the Cobra Jet Mustang and the big block Camaro. The AMX's two engine options for 1970 were the top-of-the-line 325 horsepower 390 and an all-new 360 cubic inch power plant that made 280 horsepower. The AMX's new hood featured a classy-looking hood scoop, which fed cold air into the engine. All the Go package and Group 19 performance options were still available, and the AMX was converted over to an all-new ball-joint front suspension for better handling. Meanwhile, AMC's other pony car, the Javelin, continued to be a favorite with muscle car and racing fans. AMC had hired Roger Penske and Mark Donohue away from Chevrolet and was making a full assault on the Trans Am Racing Series with the Javelin. At season's end, the team had won 3 races and placed second in several more. AMC leveraged its racing program into a signature series car this year, making 2,500 1970 Mark Donohue Javelins, and the program was positioned to go into 1971 with full momentum, which is more, unfortunately, than can be said for the AMX. 1970 proved to be the last hurrah for the two-seater, but the nameplate lived on for a few years more as a Javelin option package. Stay with us as the AMX becomes a 4-seater as the American muscle car continues. After 3 years, American Motors had proved its point with the AMX. It had created a revolutionary automobile, turned on the whole muscle car world, won races, and re-energized the car company that desperately needed a shot of excitement. But once again, the world was about to play a dirty trick on AMC. The muscle car was becoming a target for environmental and safety lobbies. It was on every insurance company's hit list, and gas prices were headed for the stratosphere. None of this was good news for the AMX. The death blow came as sales of AMXs dropped to just 4,116 cars in 1970. This was the last straw. Not even Dick T could sell another year of the two-seater to AMC's management. But there was some good news. Finally, American Motors won the Trans Am Series. The Penske-Donohue Javelin took the 1971 title over Mustang, ending 3 years of close but no cigar racing. For the next 4 years, the AMX would become the top-of-the-line performance option to the great little Javelin, which had served so well for 3 years in the AMX's shadow. The 71 Javelin's major facelift, which reshaped its front fenders and lengthened the car almost 3 inches, was an excellent platform for the AMX nameplate. Even though it was part of another car, performance and image would continue to be the hallmarks of the AMX. For $498 extra, the AMX option added new T-stripe graphics, a mesh grille, the ducktail rear spoiler, and interior appointments to the already swanky Javelin. The Javelin AMX's base engine was now the low-compression 245 horsepower 360. The 390 had been bored to 401 cubic inches this year and was the ultimate AMX engine. But as the 70s progressed and America moved farther away from high-performance cars, the axe finally fell. AMC's resources would now be spent developing cars for a different world, like the Gremlin and the Pacer. The AMX had been a radical car, even for the 60s. And it came at a time when you had to get radical just to get noticed. Today, the AMX remains one of the rarest muscle cars. In fact, that very quality is why people love them so much.
I kind of grew up with these cars in high school, and it's nice to go to a car show and have something that nobody else there has. I mean, everybody has Camaros or Mustangs or Novas, and I'm usually the only one at the car show with one of these.
On the way over here, some guy asked me what kind of Chevrolet it was, and everywhere you go, you have to explain what the cars are, and a lot of times it's kind of a blank look.
It's not a cookie cutter, it's not a belly button car where everybody's got one. We go to car shows. We took it to Columbus, Ohio, to the Good Guys Rod and Custom National. 7,000 cars, 2 AMXs.
Among today's muscle car owners, AMX fans are without a doubt the most fanatic.
I bought it brand new in January of 1969. I've been out of service just a few months, and saw it in the showroom. I had to have it. Sat in there, made vroom vroom sounds, and drove it home the next day. And I had it ever since. This car's my buddy.
I bought this car when I was a senior in college. I actually bought it just as 1970 started, but it's a 1969 AMX. I was engaged to Barb at that time, and I still have them both. So they've both been good to me, too.
He keeps hoping that I would hold up as well as the car did. But he keeps me anyway. He had a 25th anniversary party for it. And we had our 25th year anniversary at the same year, and I said, are we going to have a party for us and for our anniversary? And he said, why? But we had quite a few people over and had a party in the garage, and it was fun.
The story of the AMX is not really a car story. It's a story about a sensible car company that, for a brief moment in the late 60s, went off the deep end and made one of the most memorable cars of the muscle era. This is what happens when the car guys win one from the bean counters. Thanks for watching, and please remember, don't crush them, restore them. Hemi-motored Cudas and Challengers were awesome cars, but the ones with the little 340 engines became Trans Am racers. By 1970, the muscle car phenomenon had grown to immense proportions, and so had the muscle car. The cars were larger and heavier than ever before, and they were loaded with luxury options. And practically every one had a 450 cubic inch engine. In short, muscle cars were starting to look a lot like the full-size cars that ruled the road before 1964. But there was another type of performance car that still offered lightweight, nimble handling, and sexy styling. All the things that had turned on young America about the muscle cars. They were called pony cars. The pony cars were billed as America's version of European sports cars, but they had a definite Detroit flavor. The Cuda and the Challenger were two of the most successful executions on the pony car theme. Since the introduction of the Mustang and Camaro, Chrysler had settled for third place in sales in this attractive market segment. But the 1970 Cuda and Challenger were going to change all that. Their styling was immaculate, and their range of available engines, which included everything in Chrysler's inventory, made sure that Dodge and Plymouth lovers could do just about anything they wanted with this car, including going racing.
Chrysler Corporation stepped up in 1970 to compete in the Trans Am series, and really that just shows how competitive the pony car marketplace was more than anything else. I think all the manufacturers knew that if you were going to play in the pony car market, then you had to race the cars.
Trans Am racing was custom tailored for pony cars to go fender to fender with each other on America's finest road courses. This heads-up racing series had been raging on for several years, with Ford, GM, and even American Motors spending millions of dollars on full-tilt factory racing efforts. With all the media exposure and fan enthusiasm the series generated, the automakers thought it was worth every penny. Trans Am was about the only racing series that Plymouth and Dodge hadn't participated in. But by 1970, they wanted some of this action. Even though Ford and GM had a few years lead in car development, Chrysler Corporation called in some big-time help. And in a short time, they put together 2 first-class racing programs. Champion race driver Sam Posey recalls the excitement of being asked to form a team to race the Dodge Challenger.
Autodynamics was awful proud when we were signed by Dodge. We had almost been signed by American Motors about a month before, and had done quite a lot of the preliminary work with the Javelin deal in mind. And we just couldn't wait to strap these big fat things on and get out there and run into people.
With Sam Posey's Autodynamics fielding a Challenger and Dan Gurney's All-American Racers preparing 2 Cudas, Dodge and Plymouth then hit the market with special editions of these cars, which had road racing suspensions, big, bold graphics, and the lightweight, high-revving 340 engine. Dodge's special edition of the Challenger was called, appropriately enough, the TA. Plymouth called their car the AAR Cuda, after Dan Gurney's All-American Racers. Both cars were high style, high visibility, and loaded to the max with go-fast hardware. Young America took notice, and soon the big battle in Trans Am wasn't on the track, it was at the Mopar dealerships. Less than 3,000 copies of each car was ever made, and the people who got their hands on one knew they had something special. These cars would soon become some of the most collectible pony cars of the entire era. But could fantastic cars like these possibly have an economy car heritage? Well, yes and no. We'll start with the Cuda and its not-so-racy beginnings when the American muscle car returns. It had been 6 years since Plymouth had introduced the Barracuda, and they had been wild years. What had started as a fun little exercise of putting high-revving little V8s into sporty little cars had become the fastest-growing and most lucrative part of the entire automobile industry. The Barracuda had been upgraded from its original design, and it was now a pretty heavy-duty ground pounder. Like the Mustang, which traced its roots back to the Ford Falcon, the Barracuda had been created from an equally slow, unexciting little car called a Valiant.
Chrysler Corporation has the last word. Valiant!
The Barracuda was actually introduced a few weeks before the Mustang, but it looked so much like the compact car from which it was derived that many people actually mistook it for a Valiant. It took Plymouth 3 years to correct this misconception. When they did, the little lightweight Barracuda became more of a sports car than either the Mustang, the Camaro, or the Firebird. But the rule even for pony cars was now go big or stay home. Ford and GM had started this cubic inch race by putting big block engines in the Mustang and the Camaro. But Chrysler could bring more motor to the party than any other kid on the block. They had the Hemi. Unless you were Ronnie Sachs or a handful of other racers, the 426 Hemi and the 68 Barracuda wasn't something you could just walk into your Plymouth dealer and buy. It was, however, a little reminder from Plymouth to all the other pony cars that they could be just as serious about going fast as anyone else. Mopar's racing experience had also developed ultra-heavy-duty driveline components. Their sure-grip rear ends and bulletproof 4-speed and automatic transmissions could handle the torque output from any Mopar engine, no matter how wild. Drivetrain breakage in Chrysler products was practically unheard of. But amid all the muscle car smoke and noise, Chrysler introduced a little high-winding small block that was the best-kept secret of 1968. Their new 340 cubic inch engine. This engine used a 4.04-inch bore and a short 3.31-inch stroke. With a 445 lift cam, 10.75 compression, and a single Carter 4-barrel carburetor, it was underrated at 275 horsepower at 5,000 RPM. With its lightweight and quick revving ability, the 340 Barracuda offered agility and handling, as well as acceleration. In fact, thanks to their curb weight of 3,100 pounds, 340 Barracudas could run the quarter mile within an eyelash of other pony cars with much bigger engines. The street crowd had been calling the car Cuda for several years. So in 1969, Plymouth formalized the nickname as an option package. And now, you could even order the 440 engine in the Cuda, which was a textbook case of overkill. But after 3 years, the Cuda's body was ready for an upgrade. The new Cuda for 1970 would be an awesome muscle car and an equally good road racer. Stay with us as the third-generation Cuda hits the streets on the American muscle car. Nothing about the 70 Cuda could be traced back to any economy car. For 1970, Chrysler's designers gave it a body that turned the Cuda into the sexiest pony car on the road. The designers gave the Cuda one other thing in 1970, a running mate. The Dodge Challenger, along with the Cuda, were Mopar's new E-bodies. Their surface similarity hid many differences in the two cars, but they were both designed to hold any engine in Chrysler's inventory, from the Slant 6 to the 426 Hemi. Even though muscle cars still played the bigger is better game in 1970, there were some people out there who remembered what the pony car was originally designed to be. These people didn't have anything against straight-line acceleration. They just thought turning corners was fun too. For them, the new E-body car was a gift. If you could take your eyes off the Challenger and the Cuda's new body for a minute, you found a host of new suspension items underneath that made these cars excellent road machines. In addition to larger torsion bars, the cars featured big front and rear anti-roll bars, bigger brakes, and heavy-duty shocks and leaf springs. According to Sam Posey, the street Cudas and Challengers had a very similar feel to the ones he raced.
It feels a lot like the real racing cars did. It has the same harshness of ride. You can feel the ride. It has the same rumbly sound. It has the same kind of Spartan quality to the interior, the same heavy steering. Not quite any of those things to the degree that was felt in the real racing cars, but a good hint of it, a whiff of it.
A little extra attention to the car's suspension was a good move, because Chrysler Corporation was about to take these cars up against GM and Ford in the Trans Am series.
They really had to get on the ball to develop this car. Like I say, finding out late in '69 and having to just haul to get the thing done, and they put it all together and had to, of course, produce the street version to be able to run in the series. And so there was they were running around frantic for a while there.
With racing preparations underway, Dodge and Plymouth now went to work designing street versions of these Trans Am race cars. Like the Z28 and Boss 302 Mustang, the AAR and the TA would have a definite road racer flavor, which would set them apart from the other Cuda and Challenger models. Thanks to Plymouth's relationship with Dan Gurney, it was a natural that their car would have Gurney's All-American Racers logo on it. So it became the AAR Cuda. Dodge wanted something a little more in your face. And since Pontiac had already taken the name Trans Am, they settled for the initials TA. Plymouth decked out its Cuda with eye-catching graphics, which included a laser stripe down the side of the car, the All-American Racers logo, and a blackout hood treatment, which also blacked out the tops of the front fenders. Dodge also gave the Challenger a blackout hood treatment, and its side stripes incorporated the letters TA. The Challenger also featured a large 346 pack fender decal, just in case you didn't know who you were messing with. Both cars had ducktail rear spoilers, and each car sported a fiberglass hood. The Cuda's hood scoop was a low-drag item inspired by NASA designs, and the Challenger's was a more traditional Mopar Superstock-looking piece. Under each hood was a jewel, a special heated-up version of the Little 340. In addition to a stronger block, the AAR and TA's 340 engine mounted special cylinder heads, stronger rocker arms from the 426 Hemi, and improved valve train oiling. On top of the engine sat a trio of Holley 2-barrel carburetors on an Edelbrock aluminum intake manifold. The Pax air cleaner sealed to the scoop with a rubber gasket to draw in fresh air. To make the car legal for Trans Am racing, Chrysler had to make 2,800 Cudas and 2,500 TAs. Such a small production run made these cars in extremely short supply at the dealerships. Those who got one discovered that this was no ordinary pony car. We'll meet some of those people when the American Muscle Car returns. With less than 6,000 of these little street screamers in the pipeline, Mopar fans consider themselves extremely lucky to just get a ride in a TA Challenger or an AAR Cuda.
After I did the research on the car and found out what the car was, I knew I had something.
The 340 6-pack, the style of the car, the lines on it, really got my attention. And I didn't realize till I got this car how enjoyable it is to drive.
Challenger and AAR Cuda interiors were typical pony cars, with bucket seats, a console, large, easy-to-read gauges, and a custom steering wheel. You had your choice of either the Torque Flight Automatic or the Chrysler 833 4-speed Trans, with Mopar's pistol grip shift handle. Most cars came with power steering, power brakes, and the Music Master AM radio. Most dealers never received more than 2 or 3 of them, and there were so few AAR Cudas and TA Challengers ever made that buyers couldn't even special order them. If you wanted one, you took whatever the dealer had on the showroom floor. But the AAR and the TA were already loaded with all the trick features that their buyers wanted anyway.
These cars also featured side exit exhaust, which is very unusual. What happens is the exhaust comes back from the manifold, runs into a muffler, and then actually turns around and comes back forward and sticks out the side.
By the time Dodge and Plymouth had put on the finishing touches, they had made 2 little boulevard racers that were easily the equal of anything from GM or Ford. With the stripes and decals, the special handling, and the throaty exhaust, and even the 2 different size tires, these cars were exactly what the pony car thing was all about.
They were just perfectly shaped. The graphics were perfect. They had the high impact colors, fiberglass hoods. They looked like 1-to-1 scale Hot Wheels.
While Dodge and Plymouth were building enough street cars to satisfy SCCA's minimum production requirements, work had been continuing on putting together a racing program. Now that they had enough street versions, it was time to go to the track.
Dodge and Plymouth were late to the game in '70. They missed out on critical development time. Their efforts were incredible for a first-year team.
In choosing Dan Gurney's All-American Racers and Sam Posey's Autodynamics, Chrysler gave themselves a powerful 1-2 punch in the Trans Am series. Not only were they savvy racers, they were fierce competitors, even with each other.
Autodynamics found out that Gurney was acid dipping, and so we went and said, well, we'll acid dip even more. You know, we'll just be lighter than he is. At the first race of the year, Laguna Seca, our car was the last to go through tech inspection. And when we were finished, we asked John Tamanis, the chief tech inspector, whether he'd like to have a beer with us. He said, sure. We gave him a beer, and he relaxed and put his elbow up on the roof of our car and dented it. He said, boys, we've got a problem.
On the engine side, world-famous engine builder Keith Black was retained to build the team's race motors.
Keith Black was a genius. He was a drag racing specialist who turned to road racing to produce our engine. He never missed a beat. He made reliable engines. He made extremely powerful engines. It was the strong part of our car by far.
The Trans Am rules called for an engine no larger than 305 cubic inches. If the 340 could be shrunk down to this size and still make enough horsepower to be competitive with the Boss Mustang and the Z28, Dodge and Plymouth might just be fighting each other for the Trans Am title in 1970. We'll take it to the track when the American muscle car returns. Over a 2-month period, Mopar's would-be Trans Am racers had been stripped down, beefed up, and welded on until they were now ready for the track. From the stands, as they whizzed by at 150 miles an hour, the cars looked like the ones in the showrooms. But these were full-on race cars.
They do look stock compared to today's cars. They ain't. It was a terrible error to think of these things as being stock in any way. As I said, the whole body had been through the acid bath. The engines were anything but stock. The transmissions and rear ends had housings that were made out of magnesium with a little metal glued on them so that when the tech inspector tried with his magnet, the magnet would stick to it. We cheated from the nose of the car to the tail of the car.
Under the hood, a real miracle was taking place. Keith Black's engine shops had kept the 340's 4.04-inch bore, but had de-stroked it to 303.8 cubic inches. Thanks to the special Trans Am block, which had beefier bottom end, the main bearing web was re-drilled for 4-bolt main caps. A cross-drilled crank and forged rods were good to 8,500 RPM. And the engine was kept alive with a better oiling system. The new heads were treated to a port job, and the valve train was beefed up with Hemi rocker arms and shafts. With a single Holley 4-barrel carburetor, the engine now dynoed at over 460 horsepower. Plymouth rolled out its 2 racing Cudas for Swede Savage and Dan Gurney. Simultaneously, Dodge's Challenger entered the fray with Sam Posey in the driver's seat.
To be able to race against Mark Donahue, Parnelli Jones, and George Fulmer, and Swede Savage, my special friend, and Dan Gurney, I mean, this was fantastic stuff.
With all the chips on the table from Ford, Chevrolet, American Motors, and now Chrysler, the 1970 season was a brawl from start to finish. At stake were the pony car bragging rights and millions of dollars in car sales. Thanks to this, the Mopar teams had some interesting rules to live by.
If the engine blew up and parts were littered all over the place, you'd come in and you'd say, stuck throttle. Or you'd come in and you'd say, the transmission let me down. Or you'd come in and say, the rear view mirror fell off. But you would not say, the engine blew. Chrysler engines never blew.
Trans Am races were wild and crazy affairs. Gary Savage relives this excitement today as he vintage races his father's restored AAR Cuda.
Laguna Seca, which was the first place I drove it, you come over the crest there and the thing's squirrely all over, trying to keep it going straight into the corners, and coming down the corkscrew, which is a famous corner there. It was just something that you can't even see past the hood on these things. You're sitting down low, and all you see is the big hood, and you see the trees. So you kind of just point at the trees and you drop off the corkscrew, and you hope you're in the right place.
Neither the Cuda nor the Challenger posted a win in 1970. Suddenly, the season and the Cuda and Challenger's Trans Am racing career was over. The AAR Cuda and the Challenger TA take their place today as 2 more examples of the extremes to which American car companies were willing to go to claim the performance market as their exclusive territory. There are probably several hundred of these cars still around today. And in the muscle car hobby, very few cars are as prized or as respected as these little road rockets.
The legacy that Chrysler's Trans Am cars created continues to this day. It's amazing. I don't think anybody expected the reputation to last decades after the racing series ended.
Thanks for watching, and please don't crush them, restore them. If you thought the muscle car era ended in '74, have we got a ride for you? The turbocharged Buick Grand National. This is the 1987 Buick Regal GNX, and it's a muscle car. You heard right, a car made in 1987, complete with impact-absorbing bumpers, a catalytic converter, and, believe it or not, a V6 engine. In fact, it's not just a muscle car, it happens to be the fastest accelerating production sedan ever made. Now here's the real punchline. It's a Buick. The Buick GNX is truly one of the most incredible cars ever made. Its 231 cubic inch turbocharged V6 engine is capable of producing over 275 net horsepower. And the car's chassis is designed to put every ounce of that horsepower on the ground. The GNX is also an intelligent car. Thanks to all its onboard computers, every aspect of the car's performance is being monitored and adjusted 1,000 times a second to deliver peak performance at any moment in time. From the grille to the rear spoiler, this car's individual components were so carefully designed that once assembled, they ceased to be parts, and the GNX became one single thing. Mike Doble, manager of Buick's Advanced Special Vehicles Department, guided the GNX's development.
We realized we had to do it smart. We still wanted a rocket. We wanted a safe, dependable, secure car, but also one that still launched well, that felt well, and that was very, very good in handling both performance and straight line acceleration. But we had to do it by tweaking and twisting and channeling and using technology to get there.
The way the GNX slams you back in the seat reminds you of the good old days. But make no mistake, there's no good old days engineering anywhere in this car. This Buick is pure 21st century high tech, and it has to be. When this car was designed, the new reality of 93 octane, $1 a gallon high test said the old ways wouldn't work anymore.
In the 60s and 70s, you threw weight at it, you threw dual carburetors, you threw 4 carburetors at it. Weight didn't matter, just more horsepower, more torque. But back in those days, we kind of owned the market. We found out since that market was hard to maintain.
The GNX is the ultimate stage of development of this car, the Regal Grand National. Between 1984 and 1987, the Grand National and its more colorful stablemate, the Regal T-Type, sneaked up on a lot of unsuspecting muscle cars and put them away. Not with the usual blast of noise, but with a quiet, dignified whoosh. For muscle car fans from the 60s, these cars are a throwback to the days when big cubic inches ruled the road.
Nailing the throttle on a Grand National with a combination of being shot out of a cannon and getting launched off an aircraft carrier. I have never in my life seen a car that could accelerate so quickly and actually watch the needle sweep across the speedometer, just zoom across. It was just unbelievable.
For people too young to remember that rush of 60s horsepower, the Turbo Buicks are cars perfectly made for today's high-performance enthusiast.
I like to drive a car that has cruise control, windshield wipers work, gets 20 miles to the gallon, and can come out to the track and run, mid-12s.
With space-age computer technology, combined with Buick's 100-year-old heritage of building better cars, the Regal Grand National and the GNX rekindled a fire that had all but gone out 15 years earlier. Stay with us as Buick convinces a little 231 cubic inch engine that it's Jack the Giant Killer on the American muscle car. Since the earliest days of the automobile, there have been some foolproof ways of making a car go faster, and Buick knew every one of them. The easiest way, of course, was to build a bigger engine. So in 1908, Buick created this car, the Bug. It had a 4-cylinder engine that measured 622 cubic inches. Going by the old formula of big engine and a light body, the Buick Bug may very well have been the first muscle car. Thankfully, there were more ways of going fast than just making monster motors, and Buick led the industry in finding more horsepower. While the other automakers were still building flatheads, Buick's overhead valve engines were tearing up America's racetracks. The 1938 straight-eight Fireball engine with compound carburation was the fastest of its day, which was amazing considering the size and weight of these big and luxurious Buicks. When the muscle cars hit the streets in the mid-60s, once again Buick hit the market with a package that combined good looks, luxury, and massive power. They called it the Skylark Grand Sport. The Grand Sport's 400 and 455 engines produced tremendous torque, making the Buick GS a standout performer at the drag strip, without sacrificing one bit of Buick's legendary comfort and high style. But by the mid-70s, even the mighty Stage 1 Buicks were gone. The auto industry went from making horsepower to making fuel economy. But a few people at Buick weren't satisfied with this situation. They knew they could make fun cars again. They just had to do it differently. So a group of engineers got together and literally redefined the muscle car. They wanted to keep all the important muscle car stuff like blinding acceleration and great styling, but they had to lose the things that didn't work in the 80s, like poor handling and bad fuel economy. At the time, the Buick Regal was mixing it up pretty well on the NASCAR tracks, and even in the 80s, the old connection between racing and sales was still there.
There was still that strong belief, which I think is true today with many cars, that you win on Sunday, you sell on Monday.
The car which would become the next great muscle car was the 1982 Regal Grand National. It was more of a cosmetic exercise than a muscle car, but it was a start. Now, all Buick had to do was create a muscle car power plant to go with this excellent body, and the good old days will be back again. We'll see just how they did that when the American muscle car returns. Thanks to Buick's racetrack success, the Regal was already a well-known race car. But on the street, the 82 Regal Grand National was just another stripe and decal package. But all that was about to change.
Obviously, with fuel economy and emissions and the political pressures, we knew we had to move to something that was a little bit more economical and a little bit more environmentally friendly. And at the same time, we wanted to develop an engine that had performance that could match most V8 powertrains.
Power was the essential muscle car ingredient. For the next generation Grand National, Buick had chosen an engine that delivered good mileage and also had pretty good racing credentials. The 3.8-liter V6. Buick had been a pioneer in V6 engines as far back as 1962, when they offered one in their new Compact Special. But the V6 that would become the world's next great muscle car motor bore little resemblance to that early engine. By 1984, Buick's turbo engine group was ready with the engine that would turn the Grand National into a real muscle car. Would transform the 3.8-liter V6 from a grocery getter engine into a booster rocket was a device called a turbocharger.
Then all of a sudden they turned around and they dropped this turbo V6 in it, and it was like a change from night to day.
The 84 Grand National's 3.8-liter or 231 cubic inch turbo engine was light years ahead of earlier V6s. It made 200 net horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque, making it the most potent six-cylinder engine in GM's inventory. Along with the Garrett turbocharger, it featured electronically controlled Bosch sequential fuel injection, a specially tuned aluminum intake manifold, a higher pressure fuel pump, and a new mass airflow sensor. 84 Grand National started turning up at drag strips, doing quiet burnouts, and whispering their way down the quarter mile to low 14-second runs. which was good performance even for a high-compression 60s V8. For a 231 cubic inch 6, it was mind-blowing. But more than a few GN owners found going this fast, this quietly, to be a strange experience.
When I drove that car for the first time, I had to roll the windows down. I couldn't hear the engine.
What really stopped people in their tracks was the Grand National's menacing all-black appearance.
Luxury, high performance, and that evil-looking black paint job, I mean, those just blew everybody's mind.
Buick made 2,000 Grand Nationals in 1984, all of them blacked out from bumper to bumper. This was truly a Buick with a bad attitude. Even 60s muscle car fans agreed that the GN did everything well.
It's a lot tighter. It's a stronger car. The suspension is more solid. Overall, it's a better engineered car than the cars of the 60s.
The Grand National and the Regal Turbo T-Type were carried over unchanged for 1985, putting 4,100 more of these bonsai mobiles on the streets. With all these turbo cars out there now, other muscle car owners had to be a little cautious around Buick Regals.
Occasionally I have fun with Corvettes because one or two of them will look at it and challenge me, and this will beat most Corvettes.
But two things were about to happen in 1986, both of them predictable. Turbo car owners were finding ways to hot rod these V6 wonder engines. And so was Buick. Stay with us as Buick goes ultra high tech on the American muscle car. For the past 2 years, the people with those black Regals had been sneaking up on big-inch Detroit iron until Grand National owners couldn't get a race, except with another GN. The Turbo T-Type Regals were the real sneaky ones. They were just as fast, and they weren't even black. But just like hot rodders everywhere, Buick's engineers weren't about to quit while there was more horsepower inside this engine. And there was a lot still there. For 1986, the engine's bottom end remained the same, but on top, a lot had been changed. From its now open plenum intake manifold to better electronics, Buick's continuous improvement program for the Turbo 3.8 increased its output more than 10%. It now cranked out 235 net horsepower at 4,400 RPM and 330 foot-pounds of torque at 2,800 RPM. This year, the turbo was moved to the front of the engine, and it now fed compressed air into the intake manifold through a clever little speed secret, an intercooler. This device cools the heated air coming out of the turbocharger to make the engine's intake charge more dense and able to produce more horsepower. With the addition of the intercooler, this little engine that could had become the little engine that could kick your butt. It could now rip off high 13-second quarter miles at almost 100 miles an hour in showroom stock trim. A little tweaking, and the engine responded like the true race motor it was, which caused modern-day muscle car enthusiasts to jump all over this car with not just wrenches, but laptop computers.
It tells me my air-fuel ratios and things, and I can actually overlay that on some of the other screens and fine-tune the air-fuel based on the weather.
But regardless of its racing nature, its builders never let anyone forget that this car was Buick from bumper to bumper. Buicks were premium American motor cars, and everything about the Grand National's fit and finish said so. The 86 Regal's base price of $11,562 put it in the upper range of GM's mid-sized cars. The WE2 Grand National option package inflated this figure by $3,574, but it was loaded with good stuff. No fewer than 23 items, like air conditioning, console, a leather-wrapped steering wheel, fast ratio power steering, and excellent bucket seats, with Buick's distinctive Go Fast logo, were included in the GN package. Other GN items included special 15x7 chrome steel wheels and two 1565R steel-belted radial tires, power front discs, the TH200R 4-speed automatic overdrive transmission, a 342 rear end, the rear spoiler, and special Grand National badging. And of course, that bad black paint job. For those who wanted something other than basic black, the Grand National's fraternal twin brother, the Regal T-Type, offered all the same performance and luxury options. Plus, you had your choice of colors. By 1987, almost 8,000 Turbo Ts were on the streets, looking for all the world like plain V6 Regals, which was a dirty trick to play on V8 owners. 1987 would be the Turbo car's best sales year yet, with production scheduled for 10,000 cars. But just like the last days of the 60s muscle cars, the end was near for the turbo cars. But Buick wasn't about to let this car just disappear without doing something special. We'll be back with the amazing GNX on the American Muscle Car. With the T-Type and the GN, Buick had done the impossible. They had reinvented the muscle car and updated it for the 80s. The little 3.8-liter V6 had grown from a 180-horsepower novelty engine into a 245-horsepower Stormer in just 4 years. And these cars had proved that going fast didn't have to come at the expense of luxury, comfort, and gas mileage. And now, word came down from the ivory tower that after 1987, there would be no more of them. But this time, it wasn't a 70s we hate cars management edict that killed the GN. Typical of Buick, it was a very logical engineering decision.
Well, unfortunately, what really happened was the body went away. If you remember, 1988, they started the new front-wheel drive body, and all the G bodies were discontinued. That whole rear-wheel platform was now extinct. And they really didn't have a front-wheel drive platform that could adequately handle the torque and the output of the Turbo V6.
What happened next would make automotive history.
We knew that the production was running out. We were stopping production of the Grand Nationals. The public knew it as well. So we knew we needed to celebrate that movement of the car and its departure. So the task was to build a new Grand National, a special edition that outperformed the Grand National, but also was the Grand National to end all Grand National production.
What they built was the GNX. With the 87 Grand National as a baseline, they created a modern American classic in every way, from appearance to performance. From the car's new GNX badging to its flared fender wells and 16 by 8-inch BBS wheels to the classic Buick portholes, this was a collector's car, even before it was built.
Every car was sold before the first car was built. That doesn't often happen. And when we saw the articles that it had, and a positive media exposure in the press that it had already received from the two prototype runs, there was little choice. We had to build this car.
A special car like the GNX would have to have more power. But by now, the Turbo V6 was so well developed, there wasn't much left to modify. For help, Buick called on McLaren, the world-famous racing engine builder, to find a few more horses. Along with some reprogrammed electronics, the GNX was treated to a new ceramic-coated turbo impeller and a specially designed intercooler. Combined with an enlarged turbo exhaust housing and a less restrictive exhaust system, this helped the GNX's power plant max out at 276 horsepower and 360 foot-pounds of torque. But by far, the major changes took place in the car's suspension.
Now, we knew we had a lot more power going back to the road surface, so we knew we needed to make sure we tied down that rear end. So we couldn't allow the pig or the differential to rotate on load. So we introduced a ladder bar, a longitudinal rod, if you will, that tracked almost halfway up through the car, meeting at a mount point just aft of the rear end of the transmission. That ladder bar kept the differential from rotating on torque load. Instead, the rear end of the car lifts up. That keeps the tires planted firmly on the ground, less tire spin, far better performance.
All this work cut more than a second off the GN's 0 to 60 times. and its quarter-mile performance was astonishing. The car cornered like a sports car, and today, almost 15 years later, it still looks like the meanest car on the road. But maybe the car's greatest gift to the muscle car world was that it taught Mike Doble and the GNX team something very special about the love people have for performance cars.
I think the strongest message was that we gained a kind of a lesson or awareness of the fervor that the market had for niche vehicles. They wanted vehicles that were unique, that were special to them. Cars that set a statement that kind of meet their lifestyles and made them feel a little unique and special when they're in it.
Even though they were only in production for a few years, the turbo cars from Buick created a following as strong and enthusiastic as any muscle car ever made. In 1987, when Buick canceled the Grand National, Buick dealers all over America were inundated with orders for one of the last ones. The demand was so great that Buick extended its production run until over 20,000 1987 GNs were eventually made. Today's Grand National and T-Type owners range from people who raced big block Fords and Chevys in the 60s to young people getting their first taste of going fast and loving every minute of it. Bill Savino and his two sons, Mike and Dan, each own a turbo Buick. It was Bill who started this family trend.
I drove in '87, new in the dealership, and I fell in love with it, so I just got my chance last year to buy an '87 Grand National. Well, after I got my first Grand National, Mike decided he wanted to buy one, and then Dano got the bug. Dano bought his '85.
I've known about him since probably 8 years old. Said when I turned 16, 17, I'd like to get one. So they're a little older, they have a little more money, so had to get a cheaper one, and stumbled across this and bought it.
Thanks for watching, and remember, don't crush them, restore them. Between 1955 and 57, almost 5 million people saw the USA from one of these classic Chevrolets. America had turned out a lot of pretty nice cars in the 100 or so years we've been building them. Most of them were good everyday transportation. But the 55, the 56, and the 57 Chevy qualify as exceptional. For the nearly 5 million people who bought these cars new, and the countless millions who have owned them over the past half-century, the world would be a much different place without these three cars. These cars were their first taste of the American dream.
My first memory was, we lived in Ohio at the time, and my brothers were Ford nuts, and a friend of theirs bought a 55 Chevrolet, and I can remember him squealing his tires down the road and outrunning the Fords with it. I can remember that vividly.
The 55 through 57 Chevrolets were revolutionary in hundreds of ways. They were the first cars in what Detroit called the low price field to offer luxury car features and appointments. They were the first low-price cars to offer a true high-performance engine. But most of all, they were elegant, in a time when elegant styling was only found on the most expensive cars. By 1955, the American auto industry was hitting high gear. At the same time, the American car buyer was shifting into high and was rushing the dealerships with cash in hand, ready to buy their first new car. Chevrolet's timing couldn't have been more perfect. The new Chevrolet for 1955 made everything that had come before it look old.
This was a brand new car with dramatic new styling, brilliant two-tone colors. It was a dramatic departure from what came before.
During the next 3 years, Chevrolet would continue to refine this car. and as every new model was introduced, America would fall deeper in love with it. The 1956 Chevrolet contained a few small but distinctive changes to the original design, creating a car that was unique in its own right, and keeping car buyers' eyes focused on Chevrolet. When the 57 Chevy rolled out, for many Americans, it was as if they were seeing their first car. The 57 had taken the best of the 55 and 56 models and had carefully applied some styling enhancements that made this car a true American icon.
The 55 Chevy, 56, 57, they had a timeless design. It still looks wonderful today.
But regardless of how beautiful these cars were, they wouldn't have had the impact on America's automotive landscape without one vital ingredient: horsepower. The 55 Chevy had something no other Chevrolet had ever had: a V8 engine. The little 265 cubic inch V8 was the product of 3 years of development. With this engine, Chevrolet entered the big leagues of automotive performance, and for the first time in its history, became a car with muscle. And as we all know, muscle plus image equals a muscle car. Maybe this is where it all began. Stay with us. We'll set the time machine for the early 50s as Chevrolet starts putting the pieces together when we return on the American Muscle Car. Until the mid-50s, Detroit didn't talk about performance very much. In fact, unless they were talking about their highest-priced models, they didn't mention it at all. For the cars in the low-priced field, Chevrolet, Ford, and Plymouth, the selling points were roominess, soft ride, easy controls, and plush upholstery. Chevy was the leader of the low-priced cars, a title it had narrowly held over Ford since the 30s. Both makes offered great, trouble-free transportation, and not much else. The big difference was Ford had a V8, and had been putting it in their cars since 1932, a fact they never let anyone forget. Chevy's 194 cubic inch overhead valve 6-cylinder engine was a little less glamorous than Ford's flathead V8. In fact, everyone called it the Stoveboat. All Chevrolets since 1929 had been powered by this engine. It had been upgraded in 1936 to 94 horsepower, and back then, it was a barn burner. The Stoveboat 6 could propel Chevrolets from 0 to 60 in the 20-second range and a top speed of over 80 miles per hour. By comparison, Ford's flathead V8 cranked out 110 horsepower, and the average Ford of the day topped out at around 85 miles per hour. By 1954, Chevrolet had put several million cars on the road with a 6-cylinder under their hoods. It was the standard of the General Motors fleet and the most trouble-free power plant on the market. But an engineering revolution was taking place at General Motors, which was radically increasing the output from all their engines.
They had the 6 cylinders, and Ford was still outrunning them with their flatheads, so they had to do something. That's why they come out with a V8.
Starting in 1949 with the new short-stroke overhead valve Cadillac V8, and continuing with Oldsmobile's new 303 cubic inch rocket engine, GM was becoming the home of modern engines and big horsepower. Behind this engineering revolution was a man named Ed Cole. In 1952, Cole was transferred from Cadillac to head Chevrolet's engineering department. By 1955, he had developed a new engine which would become the most famous internal combustion engine in history, the small block Chevrolet V8. Measuring 265 cubic inches, this engine used a 3 3/4 inch bore and a short 3-inch stroke. The combustion chamber was a wedge design with 8-to-1 compression and used 1 3/4 inch intake and exhaust valves. These were huge valves for 1955, particularly on a 265 cubic inch engine. And this good breathing ability helped create 162 horsepower at 4,400 RPM with a single Rochester 2-barrel carburetor.
Once it initially took off, it seemed like everybody wanted it. because it had such great acceleration.
With the Plus Power package, which included a Rochester 4-barrel carburetor, a different intake manifold with larger ports, and dual exhausts, the engine cranked out 180 horsepower. This $55 option soon became known as the Power Pack. In addition to producing almost twice the horsepower, the 265 V8 was almost 100 pounds lighter than the Stove-Bolt 6. In anyone's book, this little engine was destined for greatness from day one.
The 265 delivered on the promise of the V8. It was smooth running, easy to start, easy to live with, delivered at that time sensational performance, and was not expensive.
Combined with Chevrolet's newly designed cars, together they created something very special, as almost 2 million car buyers were about to discover during 1955. Stay with us as the all-new Motoramic Chevrolet hits the showrooms on the American muscle car. For years, automakers had been calling their new models all new. Well, for once, this was true with the 1955 Chevrolet. Of the over 4,500 parts which made up this car, 3,825 of them were new for 1955. But you didn't have to be an automotive engineer to know that this car was all new. All you had to do was drive it. The 55 Chevy rolled out on a newly designed chassis, which was 18% lighter than the 54 frame and much stiffer. Thanks to new ball joint front suspension and new springs front and rear, the 55 Chevy's handling was vastly improved from previous years. But by far, the major change for 1955 was styling. Everybody called it Chevy's Little Cadillac, and it deserved this nickname. The designers had blown away the old 1940s three-hump styling of the front fenders and hood in favor of a smooth, even line across the front of the car. The headlights were set under little eyebrows, and instead of the typical massive chrome grille, the 55 Chevy offered a unique egg crate design borrowed from Ferrari, which was a favorite of GM design chief Harley Earl. The 55 Chevy's front-end design remains to this day one of the most distinctive of any American car ever built. Also for 55, Chevy had smoothed and streamlined the car's flanks. The top-of-the-line Bel Air featured special identification script and badges on the sides of the car. And for 1955, you had your choice of 21 different two-tone color combinations. The era of the fins was just beginning. Chevy's little tail fins were tastefully done. They also provided a nice place to put the distinctive taillights. V8-powered Chevys sported little V's below theirs. You could also tell the Power Pack cars by their dual exhaust. But by the time you noticed these, you had already lost the stoplight drag race. In 1955, nothing said upscale like gobs of chrome. While some cars fairly dripped with it, by 50 standards, Chevy's chrome was used as an accent. Options like the wraparound bumper guards, the grill guard, and finger guards for the door handles and the fuel filler door were stylish but not too gaudy. Once behind the wheel of the 55 Bel Air, its little Cadillac nickname became even more appropriate. Everywhere you looked or touched, you felt quality and luxury. From the dash with its hundreds of little bow tie embossings to the upholstery and door panels, which were available in almost as many colors as the body. The Bel Air offered almost as many luxury options as many of the higher-priced cars. In addition to air conditioning, power steering, power seats, windows, and brakes, you could deck a 55 Chevy out with everything from clocks to automatic headlight dimmers to traffic light viewers, Wonder Bar AM radios, and tissue dispensers. By the time you made a trip through all the luxury and comfort options, your 55 Chevy was as cool as any car on the road. And you had also added almost $1,000 to the Bel Air Sport Coupe's base price of $2,067. it was a fast ride out of the low-priced category. Despite its luxury and style, though, the 55 Chevy wasn't just a cream puff. The 265 V8 packed enough power to take on just about anyone on the street or the racetrack. And for 1956, Chevy was going to throw a little more under the hood. Stay with us as the 56 Bel Air does the impossible. It gets better on the American muscle car. For 1956, it seemed all of America was curious about what Chevrolet was going to do to the Bel Air. Chevrolet, though, had a plan. Step one in that plan was to make the car faster. Early in 1956, Chevrolet announced that this year the Power Pack engine would be rated at 205 horsepower, 25 more than in 55. And if that wasn't enough, they also announced that a few 56 Chevys could be ordered with a dual 4-barrel engine from the Corvette. Suddenly, this little family sedan was the hottest thing on the street. Just 2 years earlier, Chevy Bel Airs were doing 0 to 60 in around 20 seconds. Now they blasted it out in under 10. This was hot rod speed, and the kids with the flathead Fords got the message quickly. Don't mess with the Power Pack Chevys. Just as in 1955, the 56 Chevys had 3 transmission options, all with steering column shifters, a 3-speed manual box, a 3-speed with overdrive, and the Power Glide automatic. Knowing when they had a good thing going, Chevy left the 56 models identical to the 55s under the skin, but the bodies received a few minor changes.
The 1956 was the changing period for Chevrolet from the 55 to the 57. It was kind of a changeover, and they didn't know where to go. 56 was kind of like a stepchild.
People looked at automotive styling back then a little differently than they do today. They would change the grills every year. They would change the taillights every year. They would change the color palette every year. They would change interior upholstery fabric every year. This was a sensation, and everybody waited until the new models were introduced. And they would white out the windows of the showrooms, and this was a big mystery, you know. And they would draw crowds when the new models were unveiled.
The words of the day were longer, lower, and wider. So the 56 Chevy's grille was widened to body width. The parking lights were changed to rectangular shapes. And all V8 cars now had a large V below the Chevy bow tie hood emblem. Where the 55 Chevy's nose had been flat, the 56's nose was more pointed. To go with the new grille, there was some new sculpting around the headlights, which, from the side, made the car look like it was leaning forward. The rest of the side sheet metal remained the same, but the stainless trim now ran the length of the body, accentuating both the car's length and its little tail fins. This trim now defined a larger area for two-tone color schemes. In back, the taillights were redesigned. And in another touch reminiscent of Cadillac, the gas filler now hid behind the left taillight. Just like on the hood, all V8 cars were identified with a V on the trunk lid. And dual exhaust still meant that Chevy's Hot One lived under the hood. Interiors continue to be as plush as GM could make them, adding such novelties as seatbelts and padded dashes to an already full option list. In the second year of this new design, Chevy was riding a wave of success like it had never seen before. Chevy had sold over 1,800,000 55 models, and nearly 800,000 of these were top-of-the-line Bel Airs. In 1956, Chevrolet would sell almost as many cars, even in the face of the stiffest competition yet from Ford and their all-new Fairlane. But what Chevrolet was about to do to their competition was almost unfair. Stay with us for the textbook American car, the 57 Chevy, when we return on the American Muscle Car. After 2 years of a bull market in the auto business, Detroit's auto stylists were pulling out all the stops. Mopar's forward-look cars, And the fantastic 57 Fords were packed with everything car buyers wanted. But pulling off a miracle, Chevrolet's designers had gotten another year out of the 55's body shell, while making it look like a completely different car. Continuing the longer, lower, wider theme, the 57's cowl was lowered 1.5 inches, which made it necessary to move the interior fresh air vents. These were relocated to the eyebrows above the headlights. On Bel Air models, an optional gold anodized trim package replaced many of the car's chrome and stainless steel pieces, like the grille and the Chevrolet script. The car now rode on 14-inch wheels instead of 15s, as in years past. Its wheelbase remained the same, at 115 inches, but its overall length had increased to almost 17 feet. Contributing to this length was the classiest set of tail fins ever to come out of GM's design studio. On Bel Airs, these fins were highlighted by a striking accent piece made of embossed stainless steel. Interiors were even more luxurious this year, especially in the Bel Air models. And the dash was redesigned, clustering the gauges in front of the driver in a cockpit layout. No fewer than 57 luxury and performance options were listed on Chevy's order form. The 57s were the fastest Chevrolets yet, and after a ride in one, it was obvious that more Corvette engineering was finding its way into these cars. The 265 was still the standard V8, but this year the world got its first glimpse of the legendary 283. 283s were 265s bored out 1/8 inch, but that little 1/8 inch made a huge difference. 6 different versions of this engine were available. 5 of these were carbureted, from the 2-barrel equipped 170-horse engine up to the 270-horse unit with 2 4-barrel Rochesters. But the big news for 1957 was the new Rochester ramjet fuel injection, which helped this little engine produce 1 horsepower per cubic inch. Fuel injection was a $550 option, and it helped 57 Chevys race from 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds, almost 3 seconds faster than the carbureted versions. Chevy took home NASCAR's Manufacturer's Trophy at the Daytona Speed Weeks in 1957, sweeping the competition in every class in which it competed. By year's end, the 1957 Chevrolet had sold 1,522,536 cars. Even though Ford had produced more 1957 models, Chevrolet outsold their arch rival by 130 cars. Among these 1.5 million 57 Chevys were 6,103 of these jewels, the Nomad. Chevrolet produced a handful of these sporty 2-door wagons in 55, 56, and 57, never selling enough to make back their tooling costs. 1957 would be the last year for this rarest of the Tri-5 models, although the Nomad name would linger on for a few more years on conventional station wagons. With the 55 through 57 models, Chevrolet had made the transition from making plain, low-cost transportation to making stylish cars for every man. But when the 1958s were introduced, they signaled the end of an era. Some said the 58s went a little too far. They said it again in 59. Chevy would take the longer, lower, wider trend to the extreme before it would again make a car with the charm and simple style of the 55, 56, and 57. But no other car from Chevrolet would ever be so beloved by its owners. Very few car makers anywhere in the world have put together 3 back-to-back winners like the 55, 56, and 57 Chevy. There might have been faster cars, or more sporty cars, or more luxurious ones. But no other cars can do what these cars do. They make you remember when.
The Tri-5 Chevys remind us of a time in American history when neighborhoods were neighborhoods, when the focus was on family. It's an era we can be proud of as Americans.
Can your car do that? Thanks for watching. And please, don't crush them, restore them.